They say blood is thicker than water, but for 18-year-old Sarah, her own mother's blood was filled with nothing but venom. Trapped in a dusty mining town, where the law was as loose as the gravel, she woke up every morning expecting pain and went to bed praying for mercy. She thought this was her fate, to be a punching bag for a bitter woman, until she withered away. But destiny has a strange way of intervening. Sometimes, salvation doesn't come in the form of a knight in shining armor. Sometimes it comes as a terrifying, silent giant from the frozen peaks, a man the townspeople whispered about in fear. A man who didn't ask for permission. This is the story of how a quiet mountain man stole a broken girl away from hell and the shocking life she found in the snow. The heat in Cold Creek, Wyoming didn't just sit in the air. It pressed down on you like a heavy iron skillet. It was 1884, and the dust from the silver mines coated everything in a layer of grey despair, including the floorboards of the dilapidated shack at the edge of town where Sarah lived. Sarah scrubbed the wood until her knuckles were raw and bleeding, the lye soap stinging her cracked skin. She didn't dare look up. She could hear the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair in the corner. Creak, creak, creak. It was the sound of a ticking bomb. "You missed a spot," a voice rasped, wet with cheap whiskey and malice. Sarah flinched. It was a reflex honed over years of conditioning. "I'll get it, Mama. I'm sorry." Agnes Miller didn't look like a mother. She looked like a scarecrow stuffed with barbed wire. Her face was gaunt, her eyes yellowed from liver rot, and her temper was as volatile as blasting powder. She stood up the rocking chair, groaning in relief, and walked over to where Sarah was on her knees. Without a word, Agnes kicked the bucket of grey water. It tipped, soaking Sarah's tattered calico dress and flooding the spot she had just dried. "Look at you!" Agnes spat, her voice trembling with a hate that seemed to have no origin other than her own misery. "Clumsy, useless, just like your father was before the mine collapse took him. You think scrubbing a floor pays for the roof over your head? Does it pay for my medicine?" "No, Mama," Sarah whispered, staring at the spreading puddle. "Get up," Agnes hissed. She grabbed a handful of Sarah's hair, yanking her to her feet. Sarah bit her lip to keep from screaming. She had learned long ago that screaming only made the beatings last longer. "Go down to Halloway's general store. Old man Halloway says he needs deliveries done. Don't you come back without $2 or a bottle of rye. If you do, well, you know where the belt is." Sarah scrambled out the door, the screen slamming shut behind her. The harsh sun blinded her for a moment, but it was a welcome relief from the darkness of the shack. She wiped a tear from her cheek, leaving a streak of dirt, and hurried toward the center of town. Cold Creek was a mean place, filled with mean men. Miners with soot-stained faces watched her pass, their eyes lingering in ways that made Sarah pull her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She kept her head down, focused on the dusty boots of the people she passed. She entered Halloway's general store, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully, a sound that felt like a lie. Mr. Halloway was behind the counter, weighing a sack of flour. He was a decent man, but in Cold Creek, decency was often overruled by cowardice. He saw the bruise blooming on Sarah's jawline, distinct and purple, but he looked away, shuffling his papers. "Afternoon, Sarah," he mumbled. "Your mother sent you." "Yes, sir. She said you might have work." Halloway sighed, rubbing his bald head. I ain't got much today, girl. Business is slow since the vein in Sector 4 dried up." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. If she went back empty-handed, Agnes wouldn't just use the belt. She'd use the fire poker. Panic rose in her throat like bile. "Please, Mr. Halloway, anything. I can sweep the loading dock. I can organize the back room. Please." Halloway looked pained. He reached under the counter and pulled out a single silver dollar. "It's charity, Sarah. Take it and go. I can't have her coming down here screaming like a banshee again." It wasn't enough. A bottle of rye cost $1.50. Sarah stared at the coin, her hands shaking. Suddenly the light in the store dimmed. Someone had walked in. Someone big. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The idle chatter of two miners by the stove died out. Even the flies seemed to stop buzzing. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter wind. She turned slowly. Standing in the doorway was a mountain. He had to be 6'4", maybe taller. He wore furs that looked like they had been ripped off the animals by hand-bare skin wolf pelt. His boots were heavy leather, caked in mud from the high trails. A beard thick and dark as a moonless night covered half his face, and a hat pulled low shadowed his eyes. But Sarah could feel them, piercing, assessing. This was Silas Thorne. They called him the Bear of Blackwood Ridge. He came down from the mountains only 3 times a year to trade furs for ammunition, salt, and coffee. Rumors swirled around him like snow. They said he killed a man with his bare hands in Denver. They said he lived with wolves. They said he had no tongue because he never spoke more than a grunt. He walked to the counter, his heavy steps thumping against the floorboards. The smell of pine resin, wood smoke, and old blood followed him. He dropped a heavy burlap sack onto the counter. It landed with a dull, heavy thud. "Silas," Halloway stammered, his voice jumping an octave. "Good to see you. Fine winter we're having." Silas didn't answer. He just opened the sack. Inside were pelts, silver fox beaver pristine winter ermine, a small fortune in furs. Sarah tried to squeeze past him to leave, terrified to be in his orbit. But as she moved, her worn shoe caught on a loose floorboard. She stumbled, falling hard against Silas's arm. It was like hitting a tree trunk. He didn't move an inch. Sarah gasped, recoiling as if she'd touched a hot stove. I'm so sorry, sir." She waited for the blow. Men in Cold Creek hit you when you annoyed them. It was the way of things. She squeezed her eyes shut, hunching her shoulders. Silence. She opened one eye. Silas was looking down at her. His eyes were a startling clear grey, like the ice on a frozen lake. They weren't angry. They were curious. His gaze dropped to the bruise on her jaw, then to her raw red knuckles, and finally to the trembling fear in her posture. He looked back at Halloway. His voice was a deep rumble, like thunder rolling through a canyon. "Who is she?" Halloway swallowed hard. That's Sarah. Agnes Miller's girl." Silas looked back at her. For a terrifying second, Sarah thought he was going to hurt her. Instead, he reached out a hand. The hand was massive, scarred and calloused. He didn't grab her. He just held it there, palm up, waiting. Sarah stared at the hand. Slowly trembling, she placed her small, battered hand in his. He pulled her upright with effortless strength. "Go home," Halloway whispered to her, trying to diffuse the tension. "Take the dollar." Sarah clutched, the coin tears springing to her eyes. "It's not enough," she whispered more to herself than him. "She'll kill me." Silas froze. his head tilted slightly like a predator hearing a twig snap. "Who will—" Sarah looked up at him, her voice barely a squeak. "My mother." Silas stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he turned back to the counter. He pushed the pile of expensive furs toward Holloway. "Store credit?" Silas grunted. "Of course, Silas. That's over $200 in credit. What do you need? Ammo, flour?" "No." Silas turned his body, completely blocking Sarah's path to the door. The air in the room felt electric. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable beneath the beard and the shadow of his hat. "Take me to her," Silas said. Sarah's eyes widened. To Mama?" "Yes." "Why?" Silas adjusted the heavy Bowie knife strapped to his hip. "Because I have business to discuss." He didn't wait for her to lead the way. He walked out the door, the bell jingling violently. He stood on the porch, waiting. Sarah felt a wave of nausea. Bringing Silas Thorne to her house was like inviting a thunderstorm into a paper cup, but she had no choice. She walked past him, her head down, leading the monster toward the other monster. The walk back to the shack was silent. The townspeople parted like the Red Sea for Silas giving him a wide berth. When they reached the sagging porch of her home, Sarah hesitated. She's not well," Sarah warned, her hand on the doorknob. Silas reached over her shoulder and pushed the door open. Agnes was waiting. She had the fire poker in her hand, her face twisted in anticipation of violence. "You little brat, I told you if you didn't—" She stopped. The poker lowered. Her eyes went wide as she saw the massive figure filling her doorway, blocking out the sun. "Agnes Miller," Silas rumbled. Agnes straightened her dress, trying to summon some dignity from the bottom of her whiskey bottle. "Who's asking?" "What do you want here?" "Get out of my house." Silas stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under his weight. The shack suddenly felt incredibly small. He looked around, taking in the squalor. The empty bottles, the filth, and the bucket of grey water Sarah had spilled earlier. Then he looked at Agnes, and his eyes narrowed. "I hear you have a debt," Silas said. "At the store." Agnes blinked, confused. "Everyone has debts. What's it to you?" "I'm settling accounts." Silas reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a heavy leather pouch. He tossed it onto the rickety table. The sound of gold coins clinking against each other was unmistakable. Agnes's eyes bulged. She licked her lips. "Gold, $500, Silas said. "Enough to buy this shack. Enough to buy whiskey until your liver explodes. Enough to leave this town." Sarah watched, confused. Why was he giving her money? Was he an angel? "What do I have to do?" Agnes asked, her voice greedy and low. She stepped toward the table, reaching for the bag. Silas's hand slammed down on the pouch, stopping her. "You don't have to do anything," Silas said, his voice cold as the grave. "But I'm taking something." "Take it." Agnes laughed, eyeing the gold. "Take whatever you want. The furniture, the land." Silas slowly lifted his finger and pointed. Not at the furniture, not at the land. He pointed at Sarah. Her. The room went dead silent. Sarah stopped breathing. Agnes looked at Sarah, then back at the gold. A twisted, cruel smile spread across her face. There was no hesitation, no maternal instinct, just calculation. "For 500, Agnes cackled. "Take her. She eats too much anyway. She's useless. Clumsy hands." Sarah felt her heart shatter. She knew her mother didn't love her, but to be sold like a mule. In seconds, Silas didn't smile. He didn't look triumphant. He looked disgusted. He took his hand off the gold. "Done," he said. He turned to Sarah. "Pack your things, whatever you can carry." "But," Sarah stammered, tears streaming down her face. "Go where? Who are you?" Silas leaned down, his face inches from hers. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something human in those grey eyes. Not warmth exactly, but protection. "Away from here," he said. "Do you want to stay? Do you want the poker?" Sarah looked at her mother, who was already untying the pouch of gold, not even looking at her daughter. She looked at the fire poker. Then she looked at the mountain man. It was a choice between a known hell and an unknown terror. Sarah ran to her corner of the room. She grabbed her thin shawl, a comb, and a small faded photograph of her father. She wrapped them in a spare dress. It took less than a minute. She owned nothing. "I'm ready," she whispered. Silas nodded. He turned to Agnes one last time. "If I ever see you near her again," Silas said, his voice dropping to a whisper that shook the walls, "I won't bring gold next time." He placed a hand on Sarah's back, gentle, firm, and guided her out of the shack. They stepped into the blinding afternoon sun. Sarah didn't look back. She couldn't. She climbed onto the buckboard wagon he had waiting at the edge of town. As the horses started to move, heading not toward the mines, but up toward the imposing snow-capped peaks of Blackwood Ridge, Sarah realized something terrifying. She belonged to the bear now, and as the town of Cold Creek faded into the dust behind them, she wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The wagon rattled over stones that seemed determined to shatter the wheels. Every jolt sent a spike of pain through Sarah's thin frame, but she remained rigid, her hands gripping the wooden bench until her knuckles turned white. They had been climbing for 4 hours. The air had shifted from the dusty, suffocating heat of Cold Creek to a biting, thin chill that tasted of pine needles and snow. Silas sat next to her, a looming wall of fur and silence. He handled the reins with an easy, terrifying competence. He hadn't spoken a word since they left the town limits. Not one. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of terror. In Cold Creek, silence from a man usually meant he was building up a temper. She kept waiting for the backhand. She kept waiting for him to pull the wagon over into a copse of trees and demand what he had paid for. $500 was a fortune. It was more money than Sarah had ever seen in her life. Why would a man pay that much for a scrawny, bruised girl unless he had dark intentions? As the sun began to dip behind the jagged peaks of the Blackwood Ridge, casting long purple shadows across the trail, the temperature plummeted. Sarah was still wearing her thin calico dress and the threadbare shawl. She started to shiver. At first it was a subtle trembling, but soon her teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. Silas pulled on the reins. "Whoa!" The horses came to a halt on a narrow ridge overlooking a vast, darkened valley. The wind howled here, unimpeded by trees. Sarah flinched as Silas turned toward her. This is it, she thought. This is where it happens. Silas reached behind the seat. He pulled out a heavy wool blanket, thick and smelling of wood smoke. He didn't toss it at her. He leaned over and wrapped it around her shoulders. His large hands lingered for a second near her neck, adjusting the fold so it covered her throat. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, holding her breath. "Breathe," Silas grunted. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her, his brow furrowed. "You're shaking." I'm fine, sir." She lied, her voice trembling. "Don't lie to me," he said, stern but not shouting. "And don't call me sir. My name is Silas." He reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a strip of dried venison. He handed it to her. "Eat. We have another 2 hours before we reach the cabin. The horses can't take the steep trail in the dark, so we walk the last mile." Sarah took the meat. She was starving. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but fear clamped her stomach shut. She took a small nibble, watching him. He took a swig from a canteen and stared out at the horizon. "Why?" she whispered. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Silas didn't look at her. "Why what? Why did you buy me?" Silas turned his head slowly. The wind whipped his dark beard. "I didn't buy you, Sarah. I paid a ransom." "It's the same thing," she said, a sudden spark of bitterness cutting through her fear. "I'm just property. First Mama's, now yours." Silas looked at her, his grey eyes darkening. For a moment, she thought she had pushed him too far. He leaned in close, his voice low and rough like gravel sliding down a mountain. "You think you're property?" He gestured to the vast wilderness around them. "Out here there is no property. There is only survival. You were dying in that house. I saw it in your eyes. You were already dead." "And what do you want from me?" she asked, her voice breaking. Silas looked away, cracking the reins to get the horses moving again. "I want you to live, that's all." They rode in silence until the trail became too rocky for the wagon. Silas stopped and unhitched the horses. He loaded supplies onto their backs, moving with efficient strength. "Walk behind the bay mare," he instructed. "Step where I step. There are crevices in the snow hidden by the drifts. You fall in, you don't come out." The hike was brutal. The snow was knee-deep in places. Sarah's worn shoes were instantly soaked. Her feet went numb within minutes. She struggled to keep up with Silas's long strides. He moved like a ghost, barely disturbing the snow while she floundered. Twice she fell. The first time she scrambled up before he could notice. The second time her foot caught on a buried root and she went down hard, twisting her ankle. A cry of pain escaped her lips. Silas stopped instantly. He turned back, seeing her crumpled in the snow. He didn't yell. He walked back to her, crouched down, and without asking, scooped her up into his arms. He carried her as easily as if she were a bundle of firewood. "Put me down," Sarah gasped, humiliated. "I can walk." "Your ankle is swelling," Silas said flatly, "and you're slowing me down." He carried her for the last mile. Sarah's head rested against his chest. She could smell the scent of him. Leather pine and something uniquely masculine. She could hear the slow, steady thump of his heart beneath the heavy furs. It was a steady rhythm, calm and strong. For the first time in her life, despite the freezing cold and the terrifying stranger, she felt a strange sensation. She was safe. But as the outline of a cabin appeared through the trees, dark and foreboding against the moonlight, the fear returned. The journey was over. Now the reality of living with the bear would begin. The cabin was a fortress. Built from massive logs notched together with precision, it sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines that whispered in the wind. A stone chimney chuffed white smoke into the night sky. Silas kicked the door open, carrying Sarah inside. The warmth hit her like a physical blow. The main room was large, dominated by a massive stone fireplace where a bed of coals still glowed red. Rugs made of bear and wolf skin covered the floor. It wasn't dirty like her mother's shack. It was orderly, clean. He set her down on a sturdy wooden chair near the fire. "Stay," he commanded. He moved around the cabin, lighting kerosene lamps. The golden light revealed shelves lined with books, hundreds of them. Sarah stared. She had never seen so many books. In Cold Creek, reading was considered a waste of time for a woman. Silas disappeared into a back room and returned with a pair of thick wool socks and a basin of water. He knelt before her. Sarah recoiled, tucking her feet under the chair. "What are you doing? Your feet are frozen," Silas said, grabbing her ankle. His grip was firm but not painful. He began to unlace her wet boots. "If we don't warm them up slowly, you'll lose toes to frostbite. Then you really will be useless." He peeled off her wet stockings. Her feet were pale blue and white. He placed them in the lukewarm water, rubbing them briskly with his rough hands. The sensation was agonizing as the blood rushed back, stinging like needles. But Sarah bit her lip. She watched the top of his head, his dark hair messy from the hat. Here was a man who looked like he could snap a tree in half, kneeling on the floor, tending to her feet. It didn't make sense. "Why do you have so many books?" Sarah asked, trying to distract herself from the pain. Silas didn't look up. "The winters are long up here. A man needs to keep his mind sharp, or the silence will eat him alive. Can you read them all?" He looked up, then a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "I wrote 3 of them." Sarah's jaw dropped. You're a writer." "I was a lot of things." Silas grunted, drying her feet with a towel. "Now I'm just a trapper." He stood up, towering over her again. "There's a room in the back. It's yours. There's a dress on the bed it belonged to. Someone else. It should fit you better than those rags." Sarah limped to the door he pointed to. She opened it. Inside was a simple room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window looking out into the forest. On the bed lay a dress of blue wool, thick and high quality. She changed quickly the warm fabric, feeling like luxury against her skin. But as she smoothed the skirt, she felt something hard in the pocket. She reached in and pulled out a silver locket. She opened it. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype picture of a beautiful woman with laughing eyes holding a baby. Sarah snapped it shut, her heart racing. Who was she? Where is she now? Did Silas kill her? Was that why he was hiding on a mountain? The stories in town said he was a monster. Maybe the monster had eaten his family. She hid the locket back in the pocket and returned to the main room. Silas was at the stove dishing stew into 2 bowls. He set them on the table. He sat down and began to eat. Sarah stood by the wall, hands clasped, head down. Silas stopped eating. He looked at her. "What are you doing?" "Waiting, sir." "Waiting for what?" "For you to finish, so I can eat what's left." That was the rule with Agnes. Agnes ate first. Sarah got the scraps. Silas slammed his spoon down on the table. The noise made Sarah jump a foot in the air. "Sit down," he roared. Sarah scrambled to the chair opposite him and sat shaking. Silas took a deep breath, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. "Sarah, listen to me closely. I am not your mother. You do not eat scraps. You do not wait. You sit at this table, and you eat until you are full. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "Eat." She ate. The stew was rich, filled with venison and potatoes. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. Tears dripped from her nose into the bowl, but she kept eating. After dinner, Silas stood up. "I sleep in the loft," he said, pointing to a ladder. "You sleep in the room. There is a bolt on the door." He walked over to the bedroom door and tapped the iron bolt. "It's on the inside," Silas said, looking her in the eye. "You lock it. No one comes in unless you open it. Not even me. Sarah stared at the lock. A lock on the inside. It was a concept she couldn't quite grasp. "Go," he said. Sarah went into the room and closed the door. She slid the heavy bolt into place. Click. For the first time in 18 years, she was locked in a room, and she wasn't the prisoner. She was the fortress commander. She collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in the pillow, and wept until sleep took her. 3 weeks passed. The snow deepened, burying the cabin up to the windowsills. Sarah fell into a routine. She cooked, she cleaned, though Silas often told her to stop scrubbing things that were already clean, and she read. Silas was a ghost in his own home. He left before dawn to check his trap lines, and returned after dark, smelling of cold air and musk. They barely spoke, but the silence wasn't angry anymore. It was companionable. But the mystery of the locket burned a hole in Sarah's pocket. She wore the blue dress every day, and every day she touched the silver metal, wondering about the woman with the laughing eyes. One evening a blizzard struck. The wind howled like a banshee, shaking the sturdy timbers of the cabin. Silas had come home early, sensing the storm. He sat by the fire, whittling a piece of hickory wood. Sarah sat opposite him, mending one of his shirts. She couldn't hold it in anymore. "Who is Clara?" The knife in Silas's hand slipped. He didn't cut himself, but he gouged a deep scar into the wood. He stopped whittling. The air in the room grew heavy. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. I found a name inside the dress, stitched into the collar, and the locket in the pocket." Sarah pulled the locket out and placed it on the table. Silas stared at the silver object as if it were a poisonous snake. He didn't touch it. "She was my wife," Silas said, his voice hollow. "Was?" Sarah asked gently. "She died. 5 years ago. Smallpox. It took her, and—" he swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "And our daughter Emily." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry, Silas. I didn't know." "That's why I came here," Silas said, looking into the fire. "I was a lawyer in Boston, a city man. I thought I could buy safety. I thought money fixed things, but when the sickness came, money didn't matter. I couldn't save them. I burned the house down and walked west until I found a place where no one could find me." He looked at Sarah. The hard iron look was gone. He looked broken. "I saw you in the store that day," he whispered. "You looked just like her, like Clara. Not the face, but the spirit. Broken but trying to stand. I couldn't leave you there." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. He hadn't bought her to be a servant. He had saved her because he couldn't save his wife. Suddenly the dog, a large wolf-dog hybrid Silas kept outside, began to bark viciously, then a yelp and silence. Silas was on his feet instantly. He moved with a speed that defied his size. He grabbed the Winchester rifle from above the mantel and blew out the lantern. "Get in your room," Silas hissed. "Lock the door. Do not come out." "What is it?" Sarah whispered, terrified. "Someone is out there." "In this storm. That's impossible." "Not impossible." Silas cranked the lever of the rifle. "Just desperate." Silas moved to the window, peering through the crack in the shutters. Sarah rushed to her room, but she didn't close the door all the way. She left a crack open, watching. A heavy thud shook the front door. Someone was hammering on it. "Open up!" a voice shouted over the wind. It wasn't a mountain voice. It was a city voice, sharp, nasal, and arrogant. Silas didn't answer. He aimed the rifle at the door. "We know you're in there, Thorn," the voice yelled. "Or should I say, Captain Alistair Thorn of the Union Cavalry. We've been tracking you for a long time." Sarah froze. "Captain Alistair, you have the wrong man," Silas boomed through the door. "Go away before I bury you in the snow." "We have a warrant," the man shouted, "for the murder of General Higgins in 65. Open up or we burn you out." Silas looked back toward Sarah's room. He saw her face in the crack of the door. He looked torn. If he fought, she could get hurt. If he surrendered, he would hang. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice carrying across the dark room. "Do you trust me?" Sarah hesitated. She thought of the gold he paid, the warm socks, the lock on the inside of the door. "Yes," she whispered back. "Then get under the bed. Cover your ears." Silas kicked the table over to create a barricade. "Come and get at me then," he roared. The door shattered inward as a shotgun blast blew the hinges off. Snow and wind swirled into the warm cabin, followed by the dark shapes of 3 men in long duster coats. Silas didn't hesitate. The Winchester flashed in the dark crack. Crack 1 man fell backward out the door. The other 2 dived for cover behind the overturned sofa. Bullets chewed up the wood of the cabin, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. Sarah screamed, scrambling under the bed, covering her head, as the deafening roar of a gunfight filled the small home. The sanctuary was breached. The past had climbed the mountain, and it brought death with it. The cabin erupted into chaos. The sound of the Winchester was deafening in the confined space, a thunderous boom that vibrated in Sarah's teeth. From her vantage point under the bed, Sarah could see very little, only flashes of light and shadow. The kerosene lamp lay smashed on the floor, its oil spreading a puddle of blue flame near the hearth, casting frantic dancing shadows against the log walls. She heard the sharp crack thud of bullets hitting timber. She heard grunt of exertion and cries of pain. The wind howled through the ruined doorway, blowing snow into the room, mixing white powder with the dark stains that were rapidly spreading on the bearskin rugs. "Flank him, damn you! He's just 1 man!" the nasal voice Finch screamed from behind the sofa. Silas moved like the predator he was named after. He didn't stay still. He vaulted over the table he had overturned, using the moment of darkness between muzzle flashes to change position. A man in a duster coat lunged out from the shadows near the kitchen, a large revolver raised. Silas didn't even turn fully. He swung the butt of the rifle backward in a violent arc. There was a sickening crunch as wood met bone. The man dropped without a sound. Now it was just Silas and Finch. "It's over, Thorn," Finch yelled, his voice shaking slightly now. "Give it up. You can't outrun the United States Army forever." "I stopped running a long time ago," Silas growled from the darkness near the fireplace. Finch popped up, firing wildly toward the voice. 2 bullets hammed into the stone chimney, sending sparks showering down. Silas stepped out from the shadows, silhouetted by the dying firelight. He leveled the Winchester. Click. Empty. Finch heard it. He laughed a cruel, high-pitched sound. He stood up, fully aiming his revolver at Silas's chest. "Gotcha, you traitorous bastard!" Sarah, peering from under the bed. Dust Ruffle saw it happen in slow motion. Finch's finger tightening on the trigger. Silas standing tall, refusing to cower, accepting his fate. No. She wouldn't watch another person she cared about be destroyed. She wouldn't just wait for the blow anymore. With a surge of adrenaline that defied her small frame, Sarah scrambled out from under the bed. She grabbed the first thing her hand touched, the heavy cast-iron skillet resting on the pot-belly stove. It was searing hot, burning her palm, but she didn't feel it. Finch heard the movement and instinctively turned his head toward her for a split second. That second was all Silas needed. He didn't go for his knife. He charged. He crossed the 10 feet between them before Finch could refocus his aim. Silas slammed into the smaller man, driving him backward against the wall with bone-shattering force. Finch's gun went off into the ceiling. The fight that followed was brutal, primal, and short. It was the violence of the frontier, unvarnished and ugly. Silas was a whirlwind of rage, unleashing years of pent-up fury. Fists flew, blood sprayed against the logs. Finally, there was silence, save for the howling wind and Silas's ragged breathing. Finch lay motionless on the floor. Silas stood over him, his chest heaving. He was covered in blood, some his own, most not. He slowly turned toward Sarah, who was standing by the stove, still clutching the skillet. Her chest heaving, her eyes wide with horror at the carnage. He took a step toward her, and then stumbled. He gripped his left shoulder. Blood was dark and slick against his buckskin shirt. "Silas!" Sarah dropped the skillet and ran to him. He looked down at her, his grey eyes hazy with pain. You came out," he rasped. "I told you to stay." "You needed help," she whispered, reaching for his arm to support him. He looked at the skillet on the floor, then back at her. A ghost of a smile touched his bloody lips. "Yeah, I guess I did." His knees buckled, and the mighty bear of Blackwood Ridge collapsed onto the blood-soaked rug. The rest of the night was a blur of terror and work. Sarah had to drag the bodies of the intruders out into the snow just to clear a space to work. She would deal with them tomorrow. Tonight, she had to save Silas. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder, a clean shot missing the bone, but he had lost a lot of blood. Sarah went to work. The years of tending to her mother's drunken injuries, the cuts from broken bottles, the burns from falling against the stove, had given her a grim education. She heated water, tore strips from her old calico dress for bandages, and used Silas's whiskey to clean the wound. He woke up as she was pouring the alcohol onto the raw flesh. He hissed through clenched teeth, his whole body rigid, but he didn't cry out. "Drink some," she commanded, holding the bottle to his lips. He took a long pull, his eyes never leaving her face. He watched her work, his gaze intense and assessing. When she was finished tying off the bandage, he leaned back against the pillows she had piled on the floor near the fire. The cabin was a wreck. The door was propped shut with a table wind whistling through the cracks. The smell of copper and death hung heavy in the air. "Captain Alastair Thorne," Sarah said quietly, throwing a bloodied rag into the fire. "It's a strong name." Silas closed his eyes. "It's a dead man's name. They said you murdered a general. I executed a war criminal." Silas opened his eyes, and the pain in them was deeper than the bullet wound. "It was 1865. Only weeks left in the war. We came upon a Confederate encampment in Tennessee. They had already surrendered. Mostly wounded boys and old men. General Higgins. He had a hatred in him that the war had twisted into madness." Silas stopped taking another drink of whiskey. His hand was shaking. "He ordered us to fix bayonets. He ordered us to wipe them out. To save the Union the cost of feeding prisoners." Silas looked at Sarah, pleading for her to understand. "I refused. I told my men to stand down. Higgins called it mutiny. He drew his pistol on me. He was going to shoot me down in front of my own troop. "So you shot first," Sarah whispered. "I put a bullet between his eyes," Silas said flatly. It was justice. But in the army, killing a superior officer is murder, no matter the reason. I didn't wait for the court-martial. I ran. I changed my name. I met Clara in St. Louis, and I thought I had escaped." He looked around the ruined cabin at the life he had built to hide in. "But you can't escape blood. It always finds you." He tried to sit up, grimacing. "Sarah, listen to me. Finch didn't come alone. There will be others. The army doesn't forget. They know where I am now." "What are we going to do?" she asked. "Not we," Silas said, his voice hardening again to that iron tone he used when they first met. "Me. Tomorrow I'm riding down the mountain. I'll surrender at the nearest fort." Sarah felt cold ice flood her veins. "Surrender? They'll hang you. If I stay here, they'll siege the mountain. They'll burn this cabin down around our ears. If they find you with me, they'll try you as an accessory. I won't let that happen. I bought your life back, Sarah. I'm not going to be the reason you lose it again." He was doing it again, sacrificing himself, first for his men, now for her. He was a man who believed his only value lay in dying for others. Sarah stood up. The meek girl who scrubbed floors in Cold Creek was dead. She had died the moment she stepped out from under that bed with a skillet in her hand. "No," she said. Silas blinked, confused. "What did you say?" "I said no. You are not going down that mountain." The dawn didn't break over Blackwood Ridge. It bled into the sky. A bruised purple light filtered through the shattered door of the cabin, illuminating the devastation of the night before. The wind had died down, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed against the eardrums. Inside, the air was cold enough to see. Sarah sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the muzzle flash of the shotgun or the spray of blood against the logs. Silas was moving. He was pale, his skin the color of old parchment, and sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the freezing temperature. The bullet wound in his shoulder had stopped bleeding, but the movement of his arm was stiff and guarded. He was packing. He moved with a grim, mechanical determination. He wasn't packing for a trip. He was packing for a funeral. "You should eat," Silas said, his voice rougher than usual. He didn't look at her. He was stuffing a canvas sack with dried meat, a box of cartridges, and a small roll of gold coins. "I'm not hungry," Sarah replied. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, older, harder. "What are you doing with the saddlebags, Silas?" "The horses can't make it through 3 feet of fresh snow." Silas paused. He buckled the strap of the bag, his knuckles white. "The horses aren't going. I am. I'll walk the horses down as far as the tree line, then let them loose. I'll walk the rest of the way to Fort Laramie." "To surrender," Sarah said flatly. "To end it," Silas corrected. He finally turned to face her. The left side of his shirt was stained dark with dried blood. "Finch was a scout, a vanguard. If he's here, the main column isn't more than 2 days behind him. They'll have trackers, dogs, and mountain howitzers. They will tear this mountain apart to find me." He walked over to the table and placed a heavy iron key and a thick envelope on the wood in front of her. "This is the deed to a plot of land in Oregon," he said. "And a letter of credit for a bank in San Francisco. It's under a false name. It's yours. When the soldiers get here, you tell them I kidnapped you. You tell them you were a prisoner. You tell them I forced you to cook and clean. They'll take you back to town as a victim. You take the next stagecoach west and never look back." Sarah looked at the envelope. It represented safety. It represented the freedom she had dreamed of when she was scrubbing floors in Cold Creek. A life without beatings. A life of comfort. It made her sick to her stomach. "You think they'll give you a trial?" Sarah asked quietly. "I'm an officer. Even a disgraced one is entitled to a court-martial." "You're a fool," Sarah said. Silas blinked, stunned. In all the weeks they had lived together, she had never insulted him. She stood up the chair, scraping loudly against the floorboards. She walked over to the corner where the body of the man named Finch still lay, covered by a rug. Silas hadn't had the strength to drag him out yet. Sarah reached down and pulled a crumpled piece of yellow paper from the dead man's duster coat. She had found it earlier, while Silas was checking the perimeter, but she hadn't shown him until now. She slammed the paper onto the table next to the deed. "Read it," she commanded. Silas picked up the paper. It was a telegram dispatch from the Department of War, addressed to Finch. As he read, his eyes narrowed. The color drained even further from his face. Subject: Captain Thorne. Status Priority 1. Instruction: do not apprehend. Target possesses sensitive intelligence regarding Tennessee incident. Execute on sight. Confirm kill with head. No witnesses. Silas lowered the paper. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the bitterness of betrayal. "They aren't coming to arrest you, Silas," Sarah said, her voice shaking with rising emotion. "They aren't coming to give you a day in court. They're coming to erase you. You executed a monster, but that monster had friends in Washington. If you walk down that mountain to surrender, you won't make it to the front gate. They'll shoot you down like a dog and leave you in the snow." "Then I have no choice," Silas roared, the sudden shout echoing off the walls. "If I stay, they kill me and you. The order says no witnesses. Do you understand what that means, Sarah? It means if they find you here, you die too. I won't let your blood be on my hands. I have enough blood on them already." He grabbed the saddlebag and lurched toward the door. "I'll draw them away. I'll lead them into the canyons. You wait here until the shooting stops. Then you go." He reached for the door handle. Click, clack. The sound of a lever-action rifle being racked stopped him dead. Silas turned slowly. Sarah was standing 10 feet away. She held his Winchester 1873, the stock pressed firmly against her shoulder, the barrel leveled squarely at his chest. Her stance was wide, her grip solid. She wasn't trembling. "Sarah," Silas warned, his voice low. "Put the gun down." "No," she said. "You're not going to shoot me." "Try to walk out that door and find out," she threatened. Her eyes were burning with tears, but her gaze was ferocious. "You saved me from a life of hell, Silas. You showed me that I was worth more than the dirt on a floor. You gave me a home. You gave me respect. And now you want to throw your life away for a government that wants you dead. You want to leave me alone again." "I am trying to save you." "I don't want to be saved if it means you die," she screamed. "I would rather freeze on this mountain with you than live in a mansion in Oregon, knowing I let you walk to your death. You are not just a captain. You are not just a trapper. You are my family. You are the only family I have ever had." The word hung in the cold air. Family. Silas stared at her. He looked at the rifle, then up at her face. He saw the bruise on her cheek fading, replaced by the flush of defiance. He saw the girl he had pulled out of the general store, who had flinched at a raised hand, now standing ready to shoot the only man she trusted rather than let him commit suicide. She had become exactly what he had tried to make her strong. Silas's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him. He let the saddlebag drop to the floor with a heavy thud. "If we stay here," Silas said, his voice quiet, "we die. Then we don't stay here." Sarah lowered the rifle, but didn't let go of it. "And we don't go down. We go up." Silas looked toward the window, toward the jagged, razor-sharp peaks of the upper ridge. The high pass. In winter. "It's suicide, Sarah. The drifts are 20 feet deep. There's no game, no shelter." "You know the caves," Sarah insisted. "I've seen your maps. You marked the old bear caves on the north slope." "We can make it. We have furs. We have fire. We have each other." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "They expect you to run or to fight and die. They don't expect you to vanish into the sky. Let them find an empty cabin. Let them think we died in the storm. Let them chase ghosts." Silas looked at her. Really looked at her for a long moment. He saw the steel in her spine. He realized that she wasn't just following him anymore. She was leading him. He reached out his good hand and gently took the barrel of the rifle, lowering it. "You'd really shoot me?" Sarah managed a watery, weak smile. "I'd have aimed for the leg. You're heavy to carry." Silas let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. He held her tight, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a fugitive. He felt like a man who had something to live for. "All right," Silas whispered into her hair. "All right. We go up." They moved fast. There was no time for sentimentality. They stripped the cabin of everything useful, the remaining ammunition, the heavy buffalo robes, the skillet, the coffee, and the salt. Silas took the books he had written, tearing out the pages to use as kindling, leaving the covers behind. He was leaving Alistair Thorne behind. They dragged the bodies of the intruders into the root cellar and kicked the supports out, collapsing the heavy earth roof onto them. A grave for the wicked. Then Silas took a bottle of kerosene and splashed it over the floorboards of the cabin. He struck a match. "Ready?" he asked. Sarah looked at the flames beginning to lick up the curtains. She thought of her mother. She thought of the fear. She took a deep breath of the biting mountain air. "Burn it," she said. He dropped the match. As the cabin turned into a roaring inferno, sending a pillar of black smoke high into the grey sky to confuse their pursuers. Sarah and Silas turned their backs on the world below. They strapped on their snowshoes and began the brutal climb toward the clouds. They were no longer a victim and a savior. They were no longer a maid and a captain. As they disappeared into the blinding white mists of the high pass, leaving no tracks that the wind wouldn't cover in minutes, they became something else entirely. They became a legend. The people of Cold Creek would whisper about them for 50 years. Some said the bear killed the girl and died in the fire. Others said the army got them both. But the old trappers who ventured high into the peaks where the air was thin and the eagles nested told a different story. They spoke of a man and a woman who lived where no one else could, guarding the mountain free as the wind bound only to the wild and to each other. What a powerful ending. Sarah truly came into her own, proving that loyalty is the strongest weapon of all. They chose a hard life, but a free one, escaping the corruption of the world below, to forge their own destiny in the clouds. It's a reminder that home isn't a building, it's the person standing next to you in the fire. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps the YouTube algorithm show this story to more people. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next saga. I'm thinking of doing a billionaire revenge story next, or maybe a werewolf drama. Let me know in the comments what you want to hear. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.